Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sheikh Shahid, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me, to discuss with me really the process and purpose of propaganda. For those looking for their daily dose of alliteration, there it is, alhamdulillah. Um, we spoke a bit earlier, briefly, about this concept of propaganda, and I want to sort of begin our discussion with just addressing what exactly is propaganda. I do have a couple of follow-ups to that, but I think just defining it clearly and making some distinctions is important, inshallah, for just how we just kick off the conversation.
Well, I think propaganda, I think it's fairly straightforward what propaganda actually means and what it has historically been, which is just sort of the articulation, the crafting, and the delivery of a message by those in power to try to impose an understanding about a particular topic, about a particular issue, about a particular situation, or more broadly, the world in general, to impose an understanding that is in the interests of power, and that a type of an understanding that would not probably otherwise have been reached by the population if left to their own devices. In other words, if you had left people unpropagandized, they would have reached different conclusions than the conclusions that power would like them to reach. Uh, it's kind of trying to impose a certain understanding of the world that's in the interests of those who are crafting the propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know,
That's basically what propaganda is, or has been.
sure. Yeah, I mean, hearing that definition, it takes me first and foremost to probably the first book I'd ever read about propaganda, which was Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky, which
Right.
he wrote in 1988, specifically to address how mass communication, mass media in the United States, now this is in the 80s, was pretty much being utilized by various institutions, the Fifth Estate or the Fourth Estate, referring to media, to carry out messaging to garner support behind everything from the aspects of the market and economy, internalizing certain assumptions about what it means to be an American, what it means to be a non-American, as well as just promoting self-censorship of people without using covert propaganda as a means of avoiding overt coercion, right? But in just sort of kicking off the conversation, one of the other things that come to mind is a book that was written 60 years earlier by Edward Bernays, called Propaganda. And this was off of two of his books, Crystallizing Public Opinion and A Public Relations Council, where he talked about the inception of combining these various components for essentially generating mass consent. So obviously from the time of Edward Bernays, and utilizing propaganda for the De Beers campaign, diamonds are forever, diamonds are a girl's best friend, initially to generate revenue, to then like World War I, World War II, these types of images. Even Dr. Seuss, who was a Nazi and originally used his artistic skills for furthering these types of messaging and stuff. I would say that it's become a lot more sophisticated now than it was back then. So what would you like isolate as the primary medium for delivering propagandization, if that's even how you would term it or define it?
I think that the you mentioned Edward Bernays, the Chomsky book, which is I think he co-authored with Edward Sherman, I think his name is. And before that, even in the same time as Bernays, was Walter Lippmann, who was the first one to write the idea. I think he said it. I think he called it fabricating consent or something like that. They used they sort of made a play off of the original name of Walter Lippmann's book. Since that time, I think that propaganda itself has sort of metastasized into a number of other industries, such as the PR industry, marketing, advertising. And then there's a whole um, architecture of influencing thought that has also developed and become more sophisticated since those days. Because as we were talking about before we started recording,
Mhm.
if you look at the propaganda from World War II, it's comical. You can't believe that anyone would be swayed by this. It's so blatantly
Yeah.
biased. It's so blatantly deceptive and dishonest
It's
that you
ludicrous.
can't believe. Yeah, you can't believe. Like who would have thought that having Bugs Bunny cartoons is going to influence public opinion?
Mm.
You
Popeye
know,
the Sailor
like,
Man.
yeah, Popeye the Sailor. All of the cartoons were all of the cartoon characters were enlisted to
Yep.
support the war campaign
Hmm.
and the official position of the United States, which also was always infused with racist, you know, very bigoted, very stereotyping ideas that had nothing to do with actually the cause that they were supposed to be involved in World War II.
Mm. Mm.
Uh, but it worked. It was actually influential. And that, like you said, the Rosie the Riveter and these characters from propaganda,
Yeah.
even the invention of Uncle Sam as a character,
Yep. Yep.
all of these things now seem laughable
Yeah.
that that would actually have any influence on anyone whatsoever.
Mm.
Um, but of course, as I was talking about before we were recording, the approach at that time was for mass appeal,
Mm.
which meant that there had to be a lowest common denominator aspect to propaganda. We want to convince as many people as possible, the majority. We're not targeting intellectuals. We're not targeting particularly educated people. We're targeting the masses.
Mm.
So there was that sort of there's an element to it that probably even at the time there were people who would have laughed at it. That
Yeah.
there were I'm sure that there were sectors in the society who also found it laughable. Uh, but since that time, I think that institutionally and systematically, there has been the development of a much more sophisticated and much more comprehensive indoctrination system in the United States and in the West generally. But we tend to talk about the United States because really they're the vanguard of this
Yeah.
type of thing,
And they export it.
and they export it. And
Yeah.
this is the problem.
Mhm.
And not to mention the fact that, of course, they themselves did enlist the propagandists of their official enemies during World War II. They brought the Nazis over. They brought Nazis over to help them understand propaganda and understand uh, what you can sort of call mass thought control. Uh, so that's one of the things that they have been leaders in. America has really been a leader in yeah, I don't know if you can even call it soft brainwashing, but it's a type of brainwashing for the population.
I mean,
Uh,
it could even be safe to say that the advancement of technology is parallel to the sophistication. The advancement of technology is parallel to trying to promote that mass appeal, to generate those mass messages. So we go from newspapers and books and cartoons and comics to motion pictures and Hollywood, and we go from that to the nickel movie to radio, and everyone gets a radio, and then TV, and so a lot of those things were already in place on a governmental level, but then the mass access to these tools, right, of receiving and disseminating information has definitely helped also serve as the medium for delivery of indoctrination, as you termed it.
right, but until recently, what you have seen by the technology was the increase in the number of delivery methods,
Mm.
but the source of the information continued to be the same. The one who was delivering the message via these means was still the same. So the same powers were making the movies, the same powers were making. We only had, back in the States, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, we only had 3 channels. When I was a kid, we just
Old
had
enough to have
CBS,
heard about it.
NBC, NBC. Yeah. So that was before cable even, and then there was cable, and that started to change, and that there were more people who had the ability to deliver information. So the control of information until recently continued to be very tightly held, even though it was disseminated through more means, which just meant that you had, as you say, more ways of delivering to people. But what was being delivered was still under the control of the same original set of powers. With the advent of the internet, that's what has really been a challenge to delivery of propaganda. I think that's has been a challenge, and social media and so on, where anyone can create a website that can be accessed by anyone. How can you control what information is being disseminated? Because that was the essential thing before. They had the control over what was being disseminated, and the technology just gave them more ways to do it. But now with the internet and with social media, you can't control as much what is being disseminated. It's now being disseminated by all of these technologies. And this is why even now you find, I think it's like I think it's around 60% by one poll that I saw, 60% of people in America get their news from social media, not from the mainstream media.
Yeah,
This
sounds
is a
about
problem.
right.
This is a problem for the effective delivery of propaganda.
Yeah.
Because, before, like I said, you just had 3 channels that everyone watched. You had a handful of movie studios that would produce, and even with that, now you have many studios.
Yeah.
And film production companies and so forth.
Yeah.
So the real change has been the increased number of people who can sources of information, not delivery tools of information, but sources of information, has become more diverse, and I think that's become a difficult thing for the effective delivery of propaganda. It was much easier before, and now you've seen. I'm sorry.
No,
No, I was just going to say that then you have now the way that this has developed, or the impact that this has had on the society, at least in America, and I think generally, you have what has become now known as the echo chambers, where people will go to the internet and they will go to what they agree with. They will choose the sources of information that they already agree with. So then it becomes a type of self-propagandizing.
Yeah.
Where you're just doing
Self-indoctrination.
self-indoctrination. What do you call it? Self-reinforcing propaganda. And it creates, as I was talking about earlier, it creates factions in the society. So now those who traditionally were the ones who were crafting the propaganda, I think, are still doing that, but they're doing it now in a more targeted way, in a way that targets this faction, targets that faction, targets the other faction, to craft the message that will work with them. Because the ultimate goal of propaganda, previously and now, is to mobilize people behind a certain sort of action or inaction. The whole point is the point isn't just to control the mind. Obviously, the point of controlling the mind is to control the behavior, to control what people will do. That's the ultimate goal. So if you want to control a faction that's maybe on the left, you have to tell them something tailored to them and tailored to their beliefs and their priorities. In order to get them to do the same thing that you want the people on the right wing to do, but you have to tell it to the right wing in a different way in order to get them to do the same thing.
Well,
Just
even
like,
like
for example,
right
when you
wing,
talk about,
left wing, you have to be propagandized just enough, indoctrinated just enough to put yourself in that box to hear that information
sure,
too.
sure, sure.
It's like
I
a
think that's part of what I was talking about in the since the time of Lippmann and Bernays and so on.
mhm,
Uh, this indoctrination system has developed considerably, and it has become
yeah.
more sophisticated and comprehensive.
Yeah, it's like two things came to mind when you shared that. Wa barakallahu fik, may Allah bless you. I mean, the first is these proverbial silos or factions that people put themselves into, and that sort of becoming the means of, okay, it's like a soda machine. You know, you have these different types, and you just put the cup under, and you just drop it in, and you're the willful participant in that exchange, right? Like
Yes.
subhanallah, the first thing that comes to mind is this notion of identifying as left or right or liberal or conservative, and but we're not intellectually creating the parameters for what that means per se, not in every space, not to say that there are not some intellectual spaces that better define those things, but you know, this idea that, you know, it's Trump or Harris, or this sort of dichotomous this or that, and these sort of juxtapositions, it's like you have to you have to already be indoctrinated enough to say, well, here's how, the cup that I put here, and this is the what I'm going to fill it with. Another component of that too is this idea that you know, the way that the information is disseminated, the medium, and then the target audience. Like when I think about being a child, hearing about 9/11 for the first time when I was in school, and then going home and everyone being huddled around the television, and people, whether you're cycling through CNN, MSNBC, or Fox, like it's pretty much the same messaging. And at that time, I mean, I was a kid, but I don't think anyone was really thinking so critically of it the way that, say, today with the terror attack that happened in Lebanon, people are picking that apart, and just to that sort of siloing of information. I go on YouTube, I see a breaking news tab, I see I see Fox, I see MSNBC, I see CNN, and they're all saying Hezbollah, you know, this that, but no one is using the word terrorism, and no one is using the word Israel, and no one is talking about Zion, no one is using any of that to describe what's happening. But then if you just scroll just long enough, you will see someone that then, some news outlet that then does put the news forward like that. So it's like this sort of piece by piece, step by step, like, all right, so it's like the Barnum effect, or like the Forer effect, where people have come up with sort of ideological horoscopes that they then say, oh, this is my whole identity. And then you just get fed that message according to what you think is best, I guess, like relates to you in that way. But that's just an analogy that sort of comes to my mind. When you think about the efficacy of propaganda in that way, you would think that because we have far more freedom of choice, that propaganda would be diminished in its efficiency. But that's not the case. So if we understand what it is and the medium that it's delivered and how target audiences are created, how is it possible that this is still effective when we can literally see through it? We have the options to choose. Why do people still buy into that indoctrination and not try to free themselves from that?
Well, I think it is being challenged.
Mm,
I think that the efficiency is not yielding the results that it used to. I mean, we can see that very clearly.
mm,
Um, you're not able to get everyone on board the way you used to
mm,
to the interests of power. However, what I would say is to touch on what you're talking about, and it goes back to the idea of propaganda itself had to be uh, like if you go again back to say World War II era, between then and now, uh, this indoctrination system has become more sophisticated to where it used to be we want to deliver a message uh, that like we already assume certain aspects about the mass population that like I said, sort of appealing to a lowest common denominator in our propaganda that will mobilize the largest number of people. And we know certain qualities about these people, and therefore, for example, they like Popeye the Sailor Man, so we'll put it in the mouth of Popeye the Sailor Man, and khalas, it will work. And the same thing goes with marketing, celebrity endorsement. Well, we know there are people who like this actor or this actress or this singer and so on, so khalas, it will work. We don't have to do a lot of thought about that. But what they have done is now they want to determine the qualities of the person receiving the propaganda. It's not just about the delivery of the propaganda. Now we want to also have some control over the receiver of the propaganda and how they will receive it. It's the delivery and the reception. They want to control end to end. And that's what indoctrination is about. So then you have this whole thing, what you were talking about, where there's an indoctrination system that decides what your identity is, what your priorities are, what your beliefs are, and you don't even understand that that's being done to you, that it's all being decided for you. That now we're controlling the whole parameter of discussion without you even thinking about whether or not I have to accept those parameters or not. You are given these parameters, like you said. It's a soda dispensary machine, and you don't even think about the fact that maybe I don't even want a soda. I have to take this one or that one. Maybe I don't even want one. Maybe I want juice. Maybe I'm not even thirsty, but you're putting it in front of me, and therefore now I must decide this one or that one because it says something now about my identity. That, like, you don't even say, well, theoretically, if I were thirsty and if there was no other option, then between these two options, I would choose that one. It's just, I'll choose that one. I'll do it. Yeah, it becomes an unthinking thing. So this is beyond propaganda. This is beyond. This is really like control. I don't want to even use the term because it just sounds so over the top, but it's mind control.
Yeah, yeah.
It is mind control because you're controlling people's even ability to understand options, and you're putting them in a situation mentally that they don't question in any way. They don't question the framing, they don't question the parameters and what have you. And the thing that has helped with regards to the delivery of propaganda, the delivery and the controlling of messages and the receiving of messages that power wants to have delivered and adopted by the population, while they have been challenged by the increase in the number of sources of information, this has led to the creation of boxes in the society that have predictable beliefs and predictable behaviors. This is the factionalization of the society, as I was talking about, to where we know there's these people in the Republican box, there's these people in the Democrat box, there's these people in the woke box, and so on and so on and so on. And they have their own set of beliefs that are all predictable. They have a certain menu, and no one even questions that. So now we can use targeted messaging, and we can, for example, employ social media influencers who have this audience, who typically have, for example, Black Lives Matter audience, or who have Christian evangelist audience, who have Trump supporter audience, people who are red pill, people who are feminist, whatever. Now we can employ those people to deliver the message that we want, and we know that it will target those particular people because we can't do mass appeal anymore. Because the nature of the thing has become so complicated, has become more complex with these all of these different sources of information available to people, that they do have choices. So now we have to overcome the fact that they have choices by controlling what is in the choice that they will choose. You see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
What's being delivered by the choice, by the faction that they belong to.
You know, to your point, and not to dwell on this too much more, but you know, when you mention like red pill, blue pill, like when you say that, immediately my availability heuristics kicks in, and I start thinking pink pill, black pill, all these different pills, and no one is wondering why are we taking these pills, these thought pills, right? Kind of to the point of like, what if I'm not even thirsty, right? And one of the just an ayah, a verse from the Quran that comes to mind is from Surah A'raf, the 7th chapter of the Quran, the heights, verse chapter 7, verse 179, where Allah tells us about human beings, lahum qulub, that we have hearts, but some people la yafqahuna biha, they don't think with them. They're not utilizing these resources that Allah gave them. Walahum a'yun, Allah gave us eyes. Wala yubasiruna biha, but you're not even looking with them. Walahum adhan, and you have ears. Wala yasma'una biha, but you're not listening. It's like, I remember as a kid growing up, sometimes like a teacher or someone would say, like, you're looking at it but you don't see it, or you're listening to it but you don't hear it. You're touching it but you don't feel it. And
Mhm.
Allah says, when people are in such a state, God Almighty says, "Ulaika kal an'am." They are like livestock. They follow the call of the shepherd or the herder, even if it's to the slaughter. But then Allah says, when human beings take on this trait, belhum adal, they're actually even more astray, and their defining attribute is ulaika humul ghafilun. These are people who are immersed in heedlessness and absent-mindedness. There's no critical thought whatsoever. So, is the efficacy of propaganda itself, is that what makes it so powerful, or is it people's numbness to it that makes it so powerful? Is it really that people are just uncritical thinkers, and that they have to, with more exposure because of the mass media world that we live in on a scale no one could have probably predicted, is that what causes people to wake up, or is it just like maybe there's some cracks? Like, what would you say rates what makes it more powerful or less effective, and for who and why?
I don't know if there is one between those two options. I don't know. See, you're setting the parameters for me now. You're enforcing parameters on me. Uh,
I don't mean to
I don't,
indoctrinate you.
I don't know if one of those two things is more important or less important, and they are certainly intertwined
Mm,
because when you are as in America, when you come up through an indoctrination system and are heavily propagandized your whole life,
mhm,
it creates a condition in your mind.
mm, mm.
You can't say that people are just this way. We don't know what people would be like in America had there not been the indoctrination and propaganda system.
Yes, and
We have no way of knowing what they would be like,
mm,
except that I know for sure they would be much healthier than they are.
mm, mm, mm,
Uh, and I think that to a certain extent, like when you were talking about the ayah and when you were talking about your teacher saying you're looking at it but you're not seeing it,
mhm,
that's actually a really important sort of way of describing it, because it's not that they're not seeing, it's that something is specifically being shown to them and
mm,
it's being explained to them.
mm.
So you don't have a chance to look at something else or to understand it in your own way.
Yes.
We're showing this to you. This is what you will look at, and this is what it is, and I'm telling you what it is. And so therefore now you think you know something that you didn't even necessarily need to know, that you
Mm,
didn't even necessarily need to look at. But now I've put it in your mind that this is the thing you're supposed to look at, and I've explained to you what it is. Because the best way to get someone to not look at what you want them to avoid looking at is to show them something else.
mm, mm,
That it's deflection and misdirection.
mm,
Uh, and for example, we were talking about it the other day, the debate between Trump and Harris.
mhm.
I haven't until now. I haven't watched the whole thing
We need to watch
because I couldn't.
together and
I,
react.
we should because I haven't. Like I said, I started watching it, and then it seemed to me that they were going endlessly about abortion,
Mm,
as if the overwhelming majority of American citizens, this is their top priority.
mm,
You're telling me that you're putting that in front of me. Like I said, there's more than one way to blind someone.
mm, mm,
You can either blind them or you can just cover their face with something else. You can cover their eyes with something else. You put something in front of them so they can't see around it. They can't see anything else. because you're putting this in their vision. You're insisting that I must care about abortion rights, so-called, more than anything else, more than inflation, more than immigration, more than genocide, more than anything else. I'm supposed to, because this is obviously the most important thing, because you're taking up a huge portion of the debate talking about it and talking very passionately about it.
And you're important people.
Yes, of course. And you're drawing a distinction between you and the other candidate on this issue. So now I have to decide which one I'm going to be with, because, well, you're putting in front of me this very divisive issue that apparently is very important because you're talking endlessly about it. And now I have already forgotten about the things that actually matter to me. You know? So they're blinding you by showing you something and then explaining to you what it is and explaining and then you're supposed to determine what your position will be about that thing according to the identity that they have assigned you. So I will take the position on that thing according to the identity that you have, the identity option that you've given me. Because I want to fulfill that identity option. You know, I'm a liberal, so the liberal position is such and such. I will now prove my credentials as a liberal by taking the official position with regards to that thing. Or I will prove my credentials as a conservative by taking the official position according to the faction that I'm in. You know, so they've created these factional group dynamics of identity, and it goes across the board. You know, obviously, identity is a whole thing in America where there's all of these various versions of identity and all of these various criteria for what can be the basis of identity, and it never comes to behavior. It's never behavior unless it's sexual behavior, but it's never like actual morality. For example, being a moral person isn't an identity.
You know, this point that you made, it's landing even more powerfully for me, because there's an ayah, I mean, there's several ayats in the Quran, but there's a verse in the Quran in particular that really stands out from what you shared from Surah Al-An'am, chapter 6, verse 116. وَإِن تُطِعْ أَكْثَرَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, if you obey most of the people on the earth, يُضِلُّكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, they will take you away from the path of God. إِنْ يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ, they only follow assumption. They're not following anything that's concrete. You put enough of an assumptive view in front of people, and you just essentially it's like fishing. You just put this lure in front of people, and nothing about it is truly organic, but people still bite and they get hooked. And so maybe it's this idea of I don't know, the identity of Americans or Westerners. Like, I can speak for myself. I've seen the impact of this sort of shallow thinking on my people firsthand. Primary example, gang culture. Nothing about a flag, nothing about a color, nothing about the side that you wear it on intrinsically implies really very much of anything except the whatever you pour into it. But the fact that you would let that level of indoctrination, of mind control, of really buying into this system go so far as to cause you to kill someone else or to hate someone else just because it's not the same color, it's not the same side, it's not the same whatever, is a testament that, as wrong as it is, if you follow most of the people, they're going to take you away from what's correct. I don't see that to be as, you know, I mean, obviously people die on that front, and it's a different type of jahiliyyah, of ignorance, but you see these videos and these clips of the woke left and the, you know, conservative, you know, the red pillars and stuff debating with each other. And it's just a circus. It's just certified madness that, on a more human level, like you said, abortion is not the most, is it an issue in different circumstances? Sure. But is it a greater issue than unemployment, than social unrest and hyper-militarization of police and how our taxes are spent and all this? That's certainly a far more significant issue, but it's kind of like a bait and switch. Like, look over here, and you know, someone's winding something up right there in front of you. It's terrifying.
And you know, they don't the whole thing here is, you know how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always repeatedly telling us
Mm.
to reflect,
Mhm.
to think, to observe, to look at history, always encouraging us to use our minds and to reflect and to ponder and to contemplate. Uh, if you know, it's like the old sort of advice for a lawyer. Never ask a question to a witness that you don't know the answer to,
Mm. Mhm.
because you don't want to be surprised by their answer.
Yeah.
So those who are in power want to make sure that you have the answer that we want you to have. Therefore, we don't want you to be left to your own contemplation. We don't want you to be left to your own reflection, your own pondering, your own thinking, because you might come up with answers that don't serve our interests.
Mm.
So we have to stop that process. We have to control that process. We have to implant the answers in you that we need for us. So I think this is one of the reasons why critical thinking is not encouraged at all, but also why there is such a presentation and almost a it's almost forced upon you what the issues are.
Mm.
We
The
will
issues
force
are
upon
forced
you,
on you. Yeah.
yeah, because I don't want you to tell me what the issues are, because that's not in my interest as someone in power. I'm not interested in your issues. I need to tell you what your issues are, so that maybe whatever real issues you have, I never have to deal with that and you don't have to think about it. We never have to have that conversation. What your actual issues are, like the fact that you can't pay your rent, you know, the fact that you can't pay for childcare and
Mm.
what have you. We're not going to talk about that. I will tell you that your issue is whether abortion rights should be determined on the federal level or the state level.
Yes.
This is the most important thing in your life,
Mm.
because that way we never have to talk about the things that are important in your life.
Haitians eating pets.
Haitians are eating the dogs and eating the cats, and Venezuelans are taking over apartment blocks in Colorado.
Mm. You know,
I want
many
you to think about things yourself, because you might come up with the wrong answers.
so much agency being stripped from a person is you're literally taking the human element out of a human being, and then you look at the society and you wonder why depression, anxiety, a lack of focus and attention deficit disorders, every manner of mental health, it keeps cropping up. I mean, you keep taking human elements out of human beings, you leave a husk full of problems and struggling on so many levels. I think that there's a pretty common belief that I would say many believe, and forgive me if this is an exaggeration, but many believe that the only way to force someone to do something that they don't want to do, or to believe something that simply is not true, is through some type of brute force. If you don't put a proverbial gun to my head, if you don't strip me of my rights and my dignity, there's no way I'm going to just buy whatever you're selling. I'm not just going to feed into whatever it is that you're giving me. That's what most people would like to think, but obviously that simply is not the case. Otherwise, many things in the world that are happening would not happen, and Americans would see a lot more agency, would really take their government to task, obviously in peaceful and meaningful legal ways to actually uphold these rights and these limits. I want to speak more to the covert and cerebral approach that makes propaganda, indoctrination, such a powerful tool for coercion of the masses, despite the fact that many people, and I think this is fair to say, many people believe that they are 100% independent of propaganda's influence over them.
I mean, first, sort of connecting it to what you said just now about people believing that only brute force could coerce them into supporting something or believing something that they don't already believe, or that uh, that goes against their interests or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Maybe there was a time in human history when that was the case, when people had that level of integrity and that level of clarity.
Mm.
Maybe there was a time. Uh, But that's not even the case with Muslims. That's not even the case with people who have strong belief and
Mhm.
strong morals.
Mhm.
Because the fact of the matter is that when you do have the strong beliefs and strong morals, those can be manipulated. Those things can be used
Against,
to manipulate you to do something that is actually against your interest, as long as you believe that you're doing it for reasons that affirm your morality and your beliefs. This is exactly I always, when I talk about propaganda, I always go back to Iblis, Shaitan. How does he get you to do wrong?
mm,
By telling you that this is the wrong thing? By forcing you? No. By making you think it's good. By making you think it's good. Making you think that this is the best thing you could possibly do.
mm,
Uh, uh, this is propaganda. This is indoctrination. This is brainwashing. This is manipulation, and this is how it works.
mm.
You create an identity for people that has a certain characteristics, a certain, as I say, morality or principles that are attached to that identity, and then now I have to support this thing or that thing because, well, that's what I believe in,
Mm.
and I'm not able to look at it independently. And again, as I say, you're not encouraged to reflect with your own independent mind. Now your mind is in this box, in this identity box, and this is the only response possible when you're in this particular box. You understand?
Yeah.
This is the definition of the good and right response according to the rules of the box. And if you're out of that box, then we don't know what you're going to do. You might actually make an independent decision, and you're not. That's a problem. That's
Can't have
chaotic.
that. Mm.
Yeah. And then there's the fact that people themselves, especially in the West, by the way, I think the West is obsessed with categorization.
Yeah,
They're absolutely
100%.
obsessed with categorization,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and labeling and what they think of as putting things in order. They think of it that way. That's what we're doing. We're putting things in order. But the problem is that
Taxonomy.
once you
Yeah.
right, right. But once you put it in this order, you can't tolerate anything that doesn't meet the rules of that order, and then you'll just be in denial about it. You know what I mean? Like there can be no anomalies. Uh, it, it- Everything has to be forced into that. So, for example, as I said, if you're a liberal, if you're in that liberal box, we've categorized you as such, and you have now categorized yourself as such, then there's only one position you can take on an issue like abortion or feminism or what have you.
Mm,
There's only one position.
mm.
So it takes the thinking out of it.
And
And I think that
nuance. Yeah, it's just
when you,
gone.
yeah, and nuance, excuse me. And when you have uh, emphasized in your society, in your culture, the importance of this type of uh, ordering of things and categorization of things, uh, people will naturally feel uncomfortable in areas that haven't been categorized, that haven't been put in that kind of an order. They will feel uncomfortable and insecure, and you take all of the thinking out of it for them. Now you don't have to do that work. Now I will relieve you of the anxiety
The burden.
associated with things not being labeled and categorized.
Mm.
Now
Thinking.
I will alphabetize everything for you. You
Mm,
can relax,
mm.
you know, and that takes the thinking out of it. So this has to do with the numbing of people, as we were talking about, and this all has to do with the covert methods. No force is necessary. No
Mm.
force is necessary at all in order to get people to do what will affirm for them that they themselves are good. If you can find a way to make it affirming for them that they're good and that they are a force of virtue and goodness in the world and they're standing up for what's right, you can get them to do all sorts of evil.
Yeah, subhanAllah. To that point, two things that sort of stood out to me as you were sharing is this idea of labeling fallacies, how it promotes intolerance and denial. I mean, it's one of the first things that a student learns in general psychology if you go to school for psychology, which is labeling fallacies. The minute you give something a label is the minute that you've failed to try to understand it. And so if you are white, if you are black, if you are, And then when you have this high class, sophisticated social conditioning, conditioned stimulus, conditioned response, reward punishment, and you don't even need a bell anymore. You don't need Pavlov's bell or anything like that anymore. You just drool on command, right? People hear Islam and think terrorism. That's the label. There's no nuance. There can't be anything other than what I've already heard about it, right? Yeah, I already know all about that. Black people are like this, Hispanic people are like that, white people are like this. The minute that you give something a label is the minute that you fail to try to understand it. And people respond on cue. And as you said, like when you give, or as you implied, and what I've taken away from what you shared is when you give that power to someone else, people can make you do some of the most ridiculous things. They can make you believe some of the most ludicrous things under the sun. In fact, and I remember talking about this with you a couple of days ago. There's a very specific story in the Quran, in the 7th chapter, the 174th and 175th verse, about a man named Balaam. Now, his story is actually found in the Bible too, in the book of Judges, but it's very different. So I'll stick with the Quranic version because this is a bit more verifiable. But one of the things about Balaam is he was from the children of Israel. وَاتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ نَبَأَ الَّذِي آتَيْنَاهُ آيَاتِنَا فَانْسَلَخَ مِنْهَا فَأَتْبَعَهُ الشَّيْطَانُ فَكَانَ مِنَ الْغَاوِينَ. Tell them the story about a person who God Almighty had given signs and proofs, but the minute that he was given that, Satan followed up on him and caused him to actually go astray. In this story, and I'll be brief, inshallah, but in this story, this man, he could call on God with a name that caused his supplications to be readily accepted and answered. And so he would use that for the benefit of the Muslims, of Beni Israel, of the children of Israel, of the Hebrews, in the time of Moses and Aaron. And so as the children of Israel were gearing up to go into the promised land, the Canaanites knew about Balaam, and they specifically came to him and enticed him with women and wealth and land and power, all for the sake of convincing Balaam, you should use your powerful prayer to pray against Moses, a prophet of God. How stupid do you have to be to think that God is going to answer your prayer against a person sent by God? With enough time and enough enticing, he was convinced that he could do that. And whenever he went to do that, وَلَوْ شِئْنَا لَرَفَعْنَاهُ بِهَا وَلَكِنَّهُ أَخْلَدَ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ. If he had used this knowledge, he could have elevated himself, but instead he clung to the earth and he followed his desires. فَمَثَلُهُ كَمَثَلِ الْكَلْبِ. So then his example became like a dog, like Pavlov's dog to a certain extent. إِن تَحْمِلْ عَلَيْهِ يَلْهَثْ أَوْ تَتْرُكُ يَلْهَثْ. He went to move his mouth to pray against Moses, and his tongue came out like a dog that pants. And his state became, it didn't matter which way you saw him, he was always in the same sort of state. Now that's the specific example from the story of a person who was literally convinced, indoctrinated enough to do something so stupid as to open his mouth and pray against a person sent by God. And he knew that just with his desires alone, that was enough to push him. Now think about what people's sexual desires can push them to do, what people's ego can push them to do, what wealth and power can push people to do. They're like dogs. Inside, they probably think that they're thinking very hard, but really they're not thinking that hard at all. That's just something that sort of came to mind when discussing.
I mean, this is the other aspect of it, which is that there are certain things about propaganda that are or techniques that are quite easy, that people themselves make easy, because people are very, very good at convincing themselves that they themselves are virtuous, and that whatever they want to do is virtuous. People are very good at lying to themselves. They're very good at self-rationalizing, self-justification. They're very good at that.
Mm.
And most people have a very hard time admitting, for example, in the story in the Quran, okay, you're just being selfish and greedy and being driven by lust.
That's right. Yeah.
Who will admit that about themselves?
Mm.
Nobody will admit that about themselves,
Mm.
even if that's exactly what you're doing. That is
Yes.
100% what you're doing. You have to be honest with yourself. And most people have a very hard time about being honest about their darker impulses.
Mm.
And that if you're not honest about those things, how are you going to fight it? If you're not honest with yourself about it, then you will lie about it. And if you're willing to lie about it, then you're willing to do the thing that you're not supposed to do so that you can lie about it and justify it. You have to be honest because we're all just human beings. We all have our nafs. We all have are
Temptation.
subject to the waswas of shaitan. We
Mm-hmm.
all have these weaknesses,
Mm-hmm.
and you must be honest with yourself about it because if you're not, you will be manipulated either by shaitan or by someone from among the nas who is acting as shaitan,
Yeah.
or you will be a shaitan to your own self
Mm.
if you're
Mm.
not honest about these types of things. So the same goes for the same thing applies to something that's not the same as like the story that you were talking about, the story from Quran, but it applies across the board that people will there's two things that people at least two things that people are willing to are eager rather to rationalize for themselves and justify for themselves. Either something that they really want that they know they shouldn't, something that they are driven by their nafs, by their desires to do. They can convince themselves that that's not why they want to do it, that it's actually for the right reason. Like, for example, I don't want to give charity to someone because maybe they're going to spend it on alcohol. That's why I'm not going to give it. It's not because I'm greedy. It's not because I'm miserly. It's not because I'm stingy. It's because I think they will misuse the charity.
Mm.
That's why I'm not giving it. Okay, you're making a rationalization for not doing something good. Uh, the other thing is people will rationalize whatever they are helpless in
Mm.
as being something that they themselves actually want. The inevitable thing that I have no control over, I'm completely in favor of that because it's empowering to believe that.
Mm.
If and you see this many times with prior to, for example, prior to America entering a war, there are mass protests against doing it. Once it starts, there's mass support for the war,
Mm. Mm.
like overnight. Then suddenly we all support. Well, it's happening now. Okay, I'm in favor because I can't admit that my government doesn't listen to me, and it doesn't matter what I say. I can't admit my powerlessness. I
Mm.
have to empower myself in some way. So I will say that the inevitable thing that is being forced upon me is actually by my own will.
Mm.
So people can convince themselves about the righteousness of something that is evil because they want to believe that they themselves are righteous, but they don't have the power or the honesty to stop themselves from doing the evil. So they will do the evil and then convince themselves by rationality that it's righteous. That's one thing. And then the other thing is when something is forced upon them, they will pretend to themselves that they're in favor of it. So this makes it this these are two aspects in the that people self-indoctrinate and self-propagandize themselves, that takes a lot of the burden off of the people who are making propaganda.
Mm. Mm. I think, and again, forgive me if I'm overgeneralizing, but it would seem that many tend to see the hand or the voice behind mass propaganda like being in favor of a war that does not benefit the economy or the society, sending billions of dollars to a country when your own citizens are in need of billions of dollars of support, and on and on and on and on. Many tend to think that there's this invisible hand or this, powerful voice of the king or the queen, such as news or the Jews, just this supreme grand conspiracy to rationalize why the tides move the way that they do and why the people follow that ebb and flow. So people will use terms like they, they. And I think one of the most empowering things that Middle Nation gave a lot of people is, the owners and controllers of globalized financial capital. Like that gives you a clear image of who they are and what their motives are. It's capital, it's power, it's influence. So there's this idea that, oh well, they this, they that, like that there's this force or power that wants or does not want people to know or not know, or to do or to not do. And that ambiguity itself, it leaves a lot of room for conspiracy to fill the
Sure.
void. So when it comes to propaganda, there's obviously different types, from consumerist propaganda, of like, why are all these kids spending all this money on prime drinks? I don't know if you're familiar with that. You and I, we need to
Not
just take some
absolutely,
time
yeah.
to just show you, but I mean, it's wild, that craze has died down, but like there's consumerist propaganda, and then there's global policy propaganda, and then there's everything in between. But who is behind the influence? I think as Muslims, sometimes and you've alluded to this, we fall into this sort of like also deconstructed thinking where there is no sort of nuance, and we just say, oh, it's Shaitan, or oh, it's the Dajjal, or oh, it's the Jews, depending on the part of the world or the spiritual spectrum that you sit on. So who's behind the influence in our time for the things that we see? And why do they use this strategy as the means of control, per se?
Well, I mean, for the second question first, the why this means of control, it works.
Mm-hmm.
That's an easy answer for that one. It's very effective.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of who it is, I'm not sure I can really say more than owners and controllers of global financialized capital. This is, you can call it what you like, but I feel that this term is the most accurate because it is a fluid group of people. It's not a static group, and it's not a monolithic group. It's people who have power and position and resources, finance, that 99.9% of the people don't have.
Mm.
They're interested in maintaining and fortifying and consolidating and increasing their resources, their finance, and their position. And again, it's not monolithic. It's not simplistic. It also has its own factions.
Mm-hmm.
There are competing interests within it. There are competing sectors within these people, these institutions, and there's not well, I mean, it goes without saying when I say that there's competition within them. There's not necessarily unity in them either,
Mm-hmm.
except insofar as they are united against the rest of us,
Mm-hmm.
against everyone who's not from their class.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but no, but okay, then what I've said many times is that the only conspiracy theory that I believe 100% in is Iblis, and what Iblis said he was going to try to do against Bani Adam.
Yeah.
And I believe in that 100%. And it makes sense that who Iblis would target the most in any given society would be the people in that society who have the most influence over that society.
And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does tell us in the Quran that there is a a grand deceiver, rather, a grand deceiver, Shaitan, but that Shaitan is not all powerful. So as Muslims, we don't believe in this good versus equal, like it's an equal clash. It's not an equal
Right.
clash. Nothing is equal to Allah. That's core to our belief. Nothing is equal to God, the creator. Nothing has that level of omniscience or omnipotence. That does not exist. So we don't believe in some horned entity with a cabal of baby blood drinking occult members conspiring from the shadows. And the tactics of Shaitan are weak, and because he's weak, he preys on our weaknesses. Shaitanu ya'idukumul faqr. Shaitan, he promises you destitution. وَيَأْمُرُكُمْ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ. He tries to get you to do illicit and immoral behavior, but Allah promises you forgiveness, and he promises you his bounty. Wallahu wasi'un alim. Allah is the vast and power and might and the all-knowing, not the devil. And that's in Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 268. So this idea, of course, like what comes with that is, we know that from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from the Prophet of God Almighty, that there's going to come a time where the good guy is painted as the bad guy. There's going to come a time where liars are believed and the truthful are disbelieved. There's going to come a time of slander. There's going to be petty, small men who have the power and influence and control that they really don't deserve. The ruwaybida, as the hadith describes in Sunan at-Tirmidhi. Now, one may heuristically conclude it's always been that way. This is how it's always been. But the truth is that with mass media in the time that we live in, it's never been so easy as it is today. And I remember a conversation we had before, and I pushed back on some of the things you were saying. I disagreed a bit, but with time, I've seen the wisdom in your words, and that is that, anyone can get on a microphone and just say whatever it is that they want. And at first, I thought to myself, like, yeah, that's true, but no, you're right. With this sort of this mass platform, anyone can be a puppet for any form of propaganda, and anyone can sort of like reinforce their belief system by finding someone somewhere with a microphone saying the words that they want to hear, taking the burden of critical thinking off of themselves and putting it on someone else to lead their thought. So I've taken a lot of your time, so I just want to conclude with one more point with your permission, and that is, when people can't explain something that goes against their preconceived notions and often preconditioned notions of right or wrong or truth or fact, they're going to always lean into conspiracy theories as a means of validating why they disagree with something that must be a psyop. This must be propaganda. I mean, even terms like psyop has become more common amongst people who really have no idea what a psyop actually is, what it is, or what it even looks like. They wouldn't know a psyop if it came up and necked them on the back of the head. So the prevalence of propaganda has made many people feel that everything is just that. Everything is propaganda. Everything is a psyop. Everything is indoctrination. And there's this counterculture of thinking that if you push back and are cynical, not just skeptical, but cynical of everyone and everything, then now you're using critical thinking. Now you've risen above
Right.
the propaganda. So how would one effectively make a distinction between the coercive and manipulative propaganda versus the truth that rises above the noise to educate or enlighten the masses on what is actually correct?
Well, there's not a way to do that for someone,
Mm.
unfortunately. What you're talking about is the mental, intellectual, psychological trauma of coming from a society that has done nothing but lie to you your entire life,
Yes.
uh, and that has manipulated morals, has manipulated principles, has manipulated values, has manipulated religion, has manipulated virtue and everything that is actually good in order to do evil things. It's relatively natural for people to feel incredibly cynical. We talk about this with the Article 6 campaign, for example, the corrupting and corrosive impact of America's control of the United Nations and their continuous breaking of the principles of the Charter with no consequences, while still being able to present themselves as being in favor of peace and justice and security and so forth. You can't be exposed to this kind of double standard and contradiction and have it not damage your own belief in morality, in goodness, in truth, in justice, in so on.
Yeah.
Because you're seeing anyone who ever talks about these things is a liar. Anyone who ever talks about principles, anyone who ever talks about justice and morals and so forth, is actually a liar and actually a criminal. And the only reason that they're talking about this is because they want to try to get away with something, because that's the only that has been your experience. So it's relatively understandable that people have an inability to discern what's truthful and what's sincere and what has integrity, to not be able to discern that and just immediately go to this idea of it's a psyop.
Mm-hmm.
Or controlled opposition. That's another word that another term that has become very popular. I don't know. Someone said it once, and then it took off, and it became one of those trends that everyone likes to use. Just
Sounds
like for
good.
a few years there, everyone was using the logical fallacies to sound smart, you know.
Sure.
But you don't actually even, like as you say, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what a controlled opposition is. You don't know what psyop is. And the very fact that you think everything is a psyop is much closer to being itself a psyop than anything that you're pointing to.
100%.
Because you're unable to make any sort of a judgment. Your ability to judge things has been severely handicapped. And this again, I think, is just a result of a society and a system and a culture that has been deceiving you and been lying to you and made a mockery of values and made a mockery of truth for your entire life and for the lives of even your parents and grandparents.
Mm.
Uh, a society that has never meant what it said and that has never practiced what it preached and never preached what it actually practiced. So obviously, people are very cynical,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a wounded reaction when you see someone talking in a way that is unfamiliar to you and is making points that as you said contradict the opinions that you have had implanted in you to help you make sense of a world, to prevent you from ever having to try to make sense of it yourself. Because, as I said, if you did that, you might come up with the wrong answers that are not in the interest of power. So you have become used to just accepting the implanted opinions and the implanted perspectives in your mind. And when someone comes along and says something that is contradictory to that, and you are suspicious and scared and intimidated and doubtful about that person or about what they're saying, this is a wounded response.
Mm.
It's like an abused animal that someone might be reaching to pet that animal, and the animal tries to flee because it's used to being beaten.
Yes, and
So this is the same response of a lot of American people, that even when you're trying to talk to them sincerely and really with compassion or concern and honestly, the response is, I'm being lied to. The response is the same defensive, paranoid response of an abused animal, an abused pet that has never known affection, that has never known someone to be kind to them. And I don't even know I can't even identify it. I can't even recognize it when
mm.
someone is actually being honest because I've never seen it. So if someone is being honest, you know, and they're saying something that is contradictory to what I have been indoctrinated to believe, well, there has to be something else going on here. It's not possible that they're being honest and being sincere and telling me something that actually makes sense. And anyway, my ability to figure out whether or not what they're saying makes sense has already been crippled. So, I mean, I understand it, but the problem is there's nothing that, as I said, this isn't something that can be solved by someone else.
Mm.
This isn't something that I can do for you or that you can do for someone. The person themselves has to build this ability to understand things. You have to build the critical thinking.
Mm.
If you don't have the ability to do the thinking, then I'm afraid you will just be a victim
Mm. Mm.
throughout your life,
Mm. Mm.
while thinking that you are well not under thinking you're the champion,
Mm.
but you're a victim.
Mm.
You're being led by the nose.
You know, there's a perfect case study for this in the Quran, and that is in the example of the children of Israel. No one can ever accuse someone who believes in the Quran of being anti-Semitic because so many lessons are drawn from the children from Hebrews. Fir'aun in the Quran, the Jews had well, they weren't Jews yet; they were Hebrews at this time. 12 tribes and all that good stuff. But the Hebrews, Beni Israel, they had spent 400 years enslaved, and then Musa comes along to free them, and he's contending with Pharaoh, and he's given all these signs. He's given all these signs to show Pharaoh God is the one that's saying this. It's not a me thing. It's like God is telling you to let these people go. and Pharaoh kept pushing back, and he used this type of reverse psychology. First thing he did, and it's a playbook that tyrants still use to this day. The first thing he did in Surah Ghafir or Surah Mu'min, chapter 40, verse number 25, is when Musa came to the people or came to Fir'aun to free them, he doubled down on his infanticide and his enslavement rituals. He continued to kill the children, the boys, and keep the women alive, which implies nefarious reasons. But then in verse number 26, and the ayah that comes after that, he said, Inni akhafu an yubaddila dinakum. I'm afraid that Moses is going to change your religion. Who is he talking to? What is he talking about? I'm scared that they're going to change. I'm scared that Moses is going to change your religion, or he's going to make fasad apparent in the land. He's going to spread corruption. So he immediately shifts into this Islamophobic rhetoric. The person who's coming to free you, no, actually, he's the problem, and I'm scared for you. And this fear-mongering type of tactic, and he's going to change your religion. Our way of life is going to be corrupted. He's going to ruin the land. Everything is so perfect the way that it is, and he's just going to come and he's going to mess it all up.
National security.
Yeah. TSA tax. Every time we fly in America, you get that 9/11 tax. We're scared for you. And then you see TSA agents and they couldn't stop anything. If something happens, they're gonna have to call someone else to come. That's their whole job, is to call someone else. I thank Allah every time I fly that they don't give these people guns, alhamdulillah. But the point is that this indoctrination of Fir'aun, even after the children of Israel were free, they kept it. The minute Moses leaves, they replace Allah with the God that their tyrant used to worship. The minute that God gives commands, they push back. It's like their mind wasn't even capable of hearing a greater truth than whatever it was that Pharaoh told them. And it took so long to get that out of their system that the only thing that prevented them from entering the promised land was them holding on to that indoctrination, holding on to that propaganda, and believing that over what God Almighty called them to. In a lot of ways, like you mentioned earlier, people don't want to admit that they're selfish. They don't want to admit that they're greedy. They don't want to admit that I might be living life in a way that doesn't really make me happy. So they settle. They say, no, this is actually what I prefer. I prefer to be sad. It makes me strong. You come up with all types of nonsense to reinforce this worldview. But at the end of the day, the proofs really do speak for itself. Just how far gone a person has gone into sipping the Kool-Aid and buying that type of worldview. And as you also mentioned, if Moses couldn't change the mind of the children of Israel, there's no way that a YouTuber is going to be able to do that for the masses. It's when a person makes a choice that I want that greater truth. Whenever they say, I prefer nuance to just what I'm being fed, when they say, I prefer critical thinking over just following the herd. The minute a person makes that choice the same way you did, then your verbiage is going to change. Your worldview is going to change. Same way that I did when I became Muslim, my verbiage changed, my worldview changed. And that can happen for anyone else. And the idea that a person can't change, like you also pointed out, it's a testament to the trauma that they've endured from having an abuser that has swore time and time again, I'm not beating you, while you sit there with two black eyes and a bloody nose and a busted lip. You can't trust anything. You can't even trust yourself. You've been literally gaslit, not, social media watered down version of the word gaslit. You've literally been gaslit. You have Stockholm syndrome. You're a victim forever. And until you choose otherwise, you're going to stay in that role.
There's another aspect to it, which is it's connected to it, obviously, because someone who has been abused and who's a victim is lacking authority, and there's an element of a lack of authority, a lack of self sovereignty in this type of response, in this knee-jerk response. And I relate it to, for example, in prison. If you were to ask a guard, like the guard who's outside of the cell block, for permission to go to the library or permission to use the phone or what have you. He doesn't have authority, and he's afraid that if I give you permission, I'm going to get in trouble. So the answer is always no, because I don't have the authority to make that decision. And someone, if it's the wrong decision, I will pay the price for that. And so there's a lack of authority on the part of the person, where I will just reject whatever contradicts the programming that I have been given. I will just reject it because I don't have the authority, meaning I don't have even the qualifications to make an independent judgment, and to bear the consequences of making that judgment. I can't even have the confidence that I can make a judgment about what I'm hearing, to determine if it's true or correct or what have you. I don't even have the qualifications and the authority that comes with those qualifications to render a judgment about something. Therefore, the knee jerk is rejection. It's to say, no, that's the safest thing to do. I will just revert to programming, and I will reject whatever is not, I don't find it in my programming, or if it contradicts with my programming, I can't make an independent judgment about it because it's not in the book that I'm reading. It's not in the manual that I've been given. The manual that I've been given doesn't tell me instructions on what to do if this comes up. So therefore, I will pretend it didn't happen, or I'll pretend this is evil or a psyop or conspiracy or someone who's just trying to get me off my programming against my own interests because the programming is goodness and the security and everything, it's all right and meaningful and so forth. You know, there's a massive lack of agency and sovereignty and authority and there's a powerlessness in this type of response. That's why I'm again, I compare it to an abused animal, and you can also, of course, compare it to an abused person. It's the same. The response is the same. Anytime someone stretches out their hand to me, I expect to be beaten, not to be helped, not to be uplifted. If someone is stretching out their hand, it can only be to abuse me, because that's been my experience. You know, so it really reveals how traumatized and how damaged you are psychologically, emotionally, and intellectually, that you don't have the ability to make an independent judgment. And that also there are people who are trying to enforce upon you, as I said, this brings us full circle, what propaganda is. Trying to tell you, trying to give you a message to understand something, to understand a topic, to understand an issue, to understand a person, in a way that you might not reach that conclusion if left to your own devices. So now you have people who are telling other people, this is a psyop, this person is a psyop, this is a conspiracy, this one works for that, this one works for this one, you should reject, don't listen to that one, don't listen to that one. Well, why do you have to tell people who they can and can't listen to, undermine people, slander their character, and what have you, except that you know that those people will make a different judgment than the one you want them to make.
Without your influence,
Without your influence. And then you tell me, what's the psyop? You're trying to influence the way people think about what other people think, rather than helping people to think.
Or just leaving them to at least engage and then make the call themselves. It's
Correct.
like
make your own call. But that's what I don't want you to do.
SubhanAllah. We ask Allah to always make us vanguards of truth, and to put us in positions and around people who will help keep us on the straight path. And I really appreciate your time. I've taken quite a bit of it. I appreciate
it was long overdue. We've been needing to have this the conversation. Inshallah, we can do this regularly, inshallah.
Yes. I'm at your service. And to everyone who listened in, we appreciate you also taking the time to join us for this conversation. And we'll see you all soon. Until next time.